Howdy folks, hope you all had a great weekend and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. And I'm very happy to say that this episode of Mingles with Jingles has got itself a sponsor. Hopefully you're all aware by now that I don't accept sponsorships unless it's from a company or a product that I either use myself or am entirely happy to recommend to you, or both, and that is the case with today's sponsor, Incogni. Now, I'm sure you're all aware that every time you go on the internet, your personal data is being harvested by data brokers and sold on to, well, basically anybody who will pay for it. Usually, things like insurance companies or credit companies, making it harder for you to get credit and raising your insurance premiums without you even knowing anything about it. It's also possible that you may be aware that under most legal jurisdictions you're entitled to go after these data brokers and demand that they remove any information about you that they hold on file. Now that's fine in theory, but it's a lot harder in practice because, well, do you even know who these data brokers are? I mean, I didn't, but they knew who I was. And that's where Incogni comes in, because Incogni does all of the hard work for you. Incogni goes after the data brokers, submitting demands that they remove any data that they hold on file for you, and I'm actually pretty good about taking care of my online data. So when I signed up for Incogni's service, I wasn't particularly surprised to find that 69 data brokers that Incogni went after didn't actually hold any data on me, but a further 26 did. And Incogni not only got them to remove any of my personal data, they also slapped them with a suppression order to ensure that they couldn't accidentally re-add me back to their lists in the future, and they keep checking up on them to ensure that they comply with these legal requirements because, oh, would you look at that, sometimes some of them don't. So head over to incogni.com/jingles and use code JINGLES to get an exclusive offer of 60% off. That's incogni.com/jingles and use code JINGLES, or just click the link below to take your personal data off the market. So I thought I'd start off with some non-gaming related news this week, which probably isn't going to affect any of you. But when I first moved into this new place, nearly 2 years ago now, and there's a lot of cats running around on the estate where I live, but there was one in particular that stood out. I thought it was a kitten, but it wasn't. It was a very young cat, but not a kitten. It was just absolutely tiny. This little black and grey Bengal. And she had this personality that stood her apart from all the rest of the cats on the estate. She was so friendly and chatty. Anytime I'd be out on the front step, she would see me and she'd come running over, meowing and begging to be petted, and she was just this lovely, lovely little cat. And I thought she was a stray because she didn't have a collar or anything, and she was just outside all the time. Turns out she wasn't a stray. Her name is Tilly, and she's a bit of a local celebrity. Anytime I went to the supermarket or wandered down the high street, she'd be there, getting fussed over by, everybody. She would wander into all kinds of places where she wasn't supposed to be. And just be really, really friendly to everybody. This lovely little cat ended up becoming a local celebrity. She's had her own webpage, Tilly's Gosport Adventures on Facebook. And most of the time, the only reason her owner actually knew where she was at any given time was because other people would see her on the high street or in the supermarket or in the police station or the library or the council offices, all these weird places, and take pictures of her and post them up on her Facebook page. And that's how her owner was able to keep track of her. She even had her own police ID card and badge. She just, everybody loves this little cat. Well, she was killed a couple of days ago. She got hit by a car, not far from my front doorstep. Unfortunately, it didn't kill her instantly. She survived long enough to crawl off under a tree just outside where our recycling bins are, and she died there. See, in this country, if you are driving and you hit a dog, by law you have to stop and report it, but you don't have to do anything if you hit a cat. So she was found dead the next morning. It was my next door neighbour who actually found her and knew her owner, and so picked her body up and took her to her home, but the owner was at work, and so she had to take this poor little thing to the vet, where the vet could read the microchip and get in contact with the owner. So yeah, and it's like the entire town is in mourning over this cat. And I'm only slightly exaggerating here. This cat was loved by so many people because she was just so nice and friendly to everybody. On the high street, there was one bench in particular that was her favourite, and she'd spend hours just sitting there chatting to everybody and getting fussed by everybody who went past, or sometimes just sleeping because, you know, cats. And if you go into the high street now, that bench is covered in flowers and pictures of her. I mean, that's how much she was loved. You go to her Facebook page, and there are hundreds of messages of condolence. Her owner must be devastated. But I mean, I'm devastated, and she wasn't even my cat. I mean, that's just the effect that this beautiful little cat had on everybody who met her. They now want to build a statue to her and put it on the high street next to her favourite bench. Tilly, 2 years old, beautiful little cat, gone. There's just been way too much death this year. It's not been a good year. Anyway. Sorry to start off by, you know, bumming everybody out like that, but let's move on to some actual good news. So, fan favourite Dredge is getting itself some DLC next month. I think November the 16th is the release date. So, Dredge, obviously, the indie hit where, you know, when you say it out loud, it sounds really, really stupid, and yet it worked. The sort of Call of Cthulhu fishing simulator. But it worked. And it's getting its first DLC, which is coming out next month. And it's introducing a new biome, sort of an Arctic area covered in icebergs, all kinds of new equipment, a new story, new fish. You'll be able to fit your boat out with an icebreaker in order to batter your way through areas that are blocked off by icebergs. And you'll also be able to actually use the ice to keep the fish in your cargo hold fresh for longer. So all kinds of new stuff coming in the first DLC for Dredge coming out next month. I'm definitely going to be playing it, of course, because Dredge was amazing. Speaking of amazing, has anybody been playing the Phantom Liberty expansion for Cyberpunk 2077? It is really good. And of course it came after the 2.0 patch for Cyberpunk that some people might say has, and they'd not be wrong, finally put the game into the state that it should have been on launch. Of course, if you haven't played Cyberpunk in a while and you go back for Phantom Liberty, you might be a bit confused because they've completely redone the skill system. It's not quite like you're playing a different game, but it's enough like you're playing a different game that you're really not going to know what you're doing at first. But it is good. I haven't played it that much because I've got a whole bunch of other stuff at the moment. I mean, Baldur's Gate 3, Starfield, and Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty all coming out at, well, not exactly at the same time. I mean, there's been a couple of months between each, but these are all huge games that require months of time investment into playing through them. And when you've got three of them coming out within a couple of months of each other, there's going to be so much overlap. I mean, unless you're sitting down and putting 4 hours a day into Baldur's Gate 3, for example, you're never going to have completed it by the time Starfield comes out. And then Starfield also requires such a massive time investment that there's no way you're going to have completed that and Baldur's Gate 3 by the time Phantom Liberty comes out. So I've put about, I think, 4 or 5 hours into Phantom Liberty, and it's really, really good. And the experience that I've had in those first few hours, and I'm trying to keep this spoiler free because you do really need to play it for yourself. But the experience that I've had in those first few hours has been such a roller coaster ride of non-stop action. I mean, it starts off kind of slow as you explore or even get into the entirely new area that they've put into Phantom City, Night City, where Phantom Liberty takes place. But then when it kicks off, it just keeps going. It's relentless. It never stops for what feels like hours. And I've gotten to the point where I think things are about to start calming down, and I've put, 4 to 5 hours into this, and I've only just reached the point where things are starting to calm down, and I'm starting to think, how big is this? Because, I'm 4 to 5 hours in, and I feel like all I've really done is complete the intro. I mean, it feels like I could probably just go and look it up, but I want to stay spoiler free because I'm really enjoying the story. But it feels like there's a lot of gameplay in this expansion. And after, several frenzied and frenetic and utterly relentless action-packed hours, I'm only just at the point where I can actually start to take things easy and figure out what this whole expansion is actually about. It's a bit like the original story in Cyberpunk 2077, where your first couple of days leading up to the whole Konpeki Plaza heist, I mean, sorry, spoilers, but it's been out 3 years now, so deal with it. But it's not until the point where the Konpeki Plaza heist goes badly wrong and you end up in a landfill where Cyberpunk actually starts. And you'll probably have been playing for a couple of days before you get to that point. And Phantom Liberty's kind of similar. I mean, I'm hours into it before everything has slowed down to the extent that I can actually stop and take a breath and figure out what the hell's going on, who are all these new people, what is this new area. And I'm starting to get the impression that there is a lot of gameplay in this expansion. Like, I've only just scratched the surface. I mean, CDPR have made a big deal about the fact that they've got Idris Elba on board for Phantom Liberty. I mean, he's all over the promotional material. I mean, when they were building up the hype for Phantom Liberty, it was just Idris Elba everywhere. Animations, graphics, everything, Idris Elba. And I'm, like I said, 4 or 5 hours in, and I haven't even seen him yet. In fact, he hasn't even been mentioned yet. Now, here's the thing. When you get somebody like Idris Elba in your game, you're going to use him. I mean, in the same way that they made maximum use out of Keanu Reeves as Johnny Silverhand in the original Cyberpunk 2077 story. And I haven't even seen Idris Elba yet. That one fact alone leads me to believe that this is a huge expansion, and I've barely scratched the surface. And that makes me very happy in my pants, because I do love me some Cyberpunk. I mean, I realise that the game has something of a checkered past, although it's not quite up there with the redemption arc experienced by No Man's Sky, but it's in the same ballpark. But I had a really good experience with Cyberpunk the first time around, even on release. Almost completely bug-free. I mean, not completely. I had some issues with UI elements sticking around on screen, like when I would be in Netrunner mode hacking somebody. Sometimes the UI would stay up on screen when I came out of Netrunner mode, but I didn't really come across any game-breaking bugs, except for one during one particular storyline. And that one particular bug was as a result of the developers expecting you to do things in a certain order, and if you did them out of that order, which you were perfectly able to do, it would break the mission and make it uncompletable. But that was really it, in my experience. I realise obviously other people had a significantly different experience, particularly if you were trying to play the game on previous generation, or what were at the time current generation consoles, which the game should never have been released on. But my experience of the game was absolutely fine. And now, of course, 3 years after release with patch 2.0, it's still not a 100% bug-free experience. I mean, what modern game is? Even Baldur's Gate 3 has some bugs, but it's the game that it should have been on release. There has quite literally never been a better time to play Cyberpunk, and I'm definitely not in the minority with that opinion, because if you have a look at the concurrent different players on Steam, the game has never been more popular. And further good news, they've just announced that CDPR are in development with a TV production studio to do a Cyberpunk TV show. Now, yes, I realise there has already been a Cyberpunk TV show, the admittedly excellent Cyberpunk Edgerunners, but that was an anime. We're talking here about a live-action TV show, like The Witcher. And the TV studio that CD Projekt Red are teaming up with, I can't remember their name, but they're the TV studio that are responsible for the True Detective TV show, amongst other things. And True Detective has been one of the most consistently awesome TV shows that I have watched in recent years. If you haven't seen it, each season of True Detective was its own story, so you didn't need to have watched season 1 in order to enjoy season 2. And I think season 2 starred Colin Farrell. I mean, yeah, there's some big names in here. Season 1 was Matthew McConaughey in what, for me, was the best role he has ever played in anything, TV or movie, alongside Woody Harrelson, tracking down a serial killer over a case that spanned like a decade. Just amazing TV shows, and these are the guys that CDPR are getting on board to do a Cyberpunk TV show. So, cautiously optimistic about that. I mean, it's not the first CD Projekt Red live-action TV... Well, technically it is the first CD Projekt Red live-action TV show, because... Yeah, but Jingles, what about The Witcher? Yeah, I know, Henry Cavill's Witcher. But that was based on the books, not the game. Although Henry Cavill did base his characterization of Geralt on the game, because he played the game, but he hadn't read the books. At least he hadn't read the books before he accepted the role, but you get the idea. The thing is, when you're doing something like The Witcher for television, it's not that difficult. I mean, it's not going to be easy, because you can't just take the cameras out onto the streets of Los Angeles and film there. You know, you're setting it in a fantasy world. You have to build a fantasy world and film it. But it's easier to build a fantasy world than it is something like Night City in a science fiction show. Because Europe exists, and Europe has lots of old medieval villages that require not a huge amount in the way of set dressing to make it look like a fantasy setting. And a fight in the woods, you know, woods are just woods. We've got lots of them. If you're filming in some place like the Czech Republic, a lot of the hard work is done for you. But Night City doesn't exist anywhere, right? Except in Cyberpunk 2077. So there's a bit more of a challenge there to build a realistic world in which to set the TV show, but they do have a bit of a head start because, you know, it's been done in collaboration with CD Projekt Red, and they have built Night City. Obviously it only exists on computer, but a lot of the conceptual, in fact all of the conceptual work and probably most of the 3D modelling work has already been done. And we're at the stage with technology now where if you give them enough time to do it properly, television CGI is really, really good. I mean, theoretically, you wouldn't even have to 3D model and render Night City, although they probably will because they have the assets, but you could just take the cameras out onto, you know, any city that's been around 50 years or more, find some alleys and back streets, film there, and then just composite some CGI over it to turn it into a neon-drenched version of Night City. The trick, of course, is given the CGI artists enough time to do it properly. I mean, I'm sure we can all point to our favourite movie, Black Panther, for example, with diabolically bad CGI, which is almost always a direct result of the goalposts being shifted on the CGI artists and then being given weeks rather than months to actually do a proper job. Now, I'm not saying that's not going to happen to the Cyberpunk TV show as well. You never know your luck. What I am saying is that the technology has matured enough that you can have very convincing futuristic cities in something made with a TV budget. You just have to give the artists enough time to do it properly. And they should have the time to get it done. Because, you know, it's not like old science fiction shows like Star Trek The Next Generation. And it really is an old science fiction show, by the way. It's actually kind of scary when you sit down and think about it, but Star Trek The Next Generation first aired in 1987. Right, that's nearly 40 years ago. God, I feel old. But, you know, at the time when they were filming each episode, they didn't have the whole season in the can before it was released. You know, they were still filming, for example, the second half of Season 2 when the first half of Season 2 was airing. So they literally had a week to do the CGI for each episode. And if there were any particularly CG-heavy scenes coming up, it would have to eat into the time allocation available to the other episodes. Like if there were any huge space battles or lots of phasers being fired, all this shit was being done on a week-to-week basis. You don't have that with modern TV shows. They are filmed, edited, post-production is done before they make it anywhere near your TV screen. So they should have the time to get it done right. Doesn't mean they will, because anything can happen. But I remain cautiously optimistic. Finally, there's a little Easter egg in Phantom... Well, there's more than one Easter egg in Phantom Liberty. CD Projekt Red's games are littered with Easter eggs, usually references to other of their own games. But very, very early on in Phantom Liberty, where you're talking to Johnny Silverhand and he's leaning against the wall, and on that wall is taped a sticky note. And on that sticky note is a phone number. And if you call that phone number on your in-game phone, not your real one, you get put on hold. And the on-hold music is the soundtrack to The Witcher 3, which is kind of cool. Although you realise what this means, don't you? People are going around, not just Night City, but the Badlands surrounding Night City as well, with a fine tooth comb. They are opening every drawer, every locker. They are checking every computer terminal, every post-it, every poster, every advertisement, looking for phone numbers and URLs, and then seeing if something happens when they input those URLs or call those phone numbers. And they're finding cool shit. Because CDPR put it in there. And I think that's a perfectly acceptable waste of your time. And I hope you've all enjoyed the previous 20 minutes, perfectly acceptable waste of your time, listening to this episode of Mingles with Jingles, because that's it for today. I hope you've all enjoyed it. I hope you all had a fantastic weekend. And as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.